The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns and rows of identical houses, each one blending seamlessly into the next. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night and children played outside until dusk without a care in the world. But not everyone felt safe here. Not Marcus Kane. Marcus had moved to this sleepy town 6 months ago, seeking refuge from a life he'd left behind. He didn't talk much about his past, only that he'd served in the military and decided it was time for a change. To his neighbors, he seemed like just another faceless man trying to start fresh. They nodded politely when they passed him on the sidewalk, but never bothered to get to know him better. And that suited Marcus just fine. He preferred solitude, anyway. But tonight, something dark loomed over the peaceful suburb. A group of men gathered under the cover of darkness near Marcus's house. They were members of a gang known locally as the Iron Fist, infamous for their violent acts fueled by hatred and prejudice. Their leader, Dax, was a burly man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his arms. His voice carried authority, even though his words dripped with venom. "Tonight, we send a message," Dax growled, addressing his crew. "This guy thinks he can move in here and act like he belongs. We'll show him what happens when you cross us." The others nodded, eagerly, their faces illuminated by the faint red glow of cigarette tips. None of them knew much about Marcus beyond rumors. They'd heard whispers that he was different, maybe even dangerous. But Dax dismissed those stories as nonsense. In his mind, anyone living in this cookie-cutter neighborhood couldn't possibly pose a threat. Tonight they would burn his house down and teach him a lesson he wouldn't forget. As the gang approached Marcus's home, they moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows. The house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, its windows dark and curtains drawn. It looked abandoned, almost eerie. Dax signaled for his men to spread out, surrounding the property. One of them pulled a Molotov cocktail from a duffel bag. A crude weapon made of a glass bottle filled with gasoline and a rag stuffed inside. Lighting it with a flick of his lighter, he hurled it toward the front porch. The explosion was sudden and deafening. Flames erupted instantly, devouring the wooden railing and spreading quickly up the walls. Bright orange tongues licked hungrily at the siding, illuminating the entire street. The gang cheered, their laughter echoing through the otherwise silent night. They stood back, admiring their handiwork as smoke billowed into the sky. "That'll teach him," one of them shouted, pumping his fist in triumph. But little did they know the man inside wasn't like anyone they'd ever encountered before. Inside the burning house, Marcus remained eerily calm. He stood in the center of his living room, watching as fire consumed everything around him. The heat was intense, searing his skin and making it hard to breathe. Yet there was no trace of panic in his expression, only focus. Years of training had taught him how to stay composed in situations far worse than this. This was nothing more than another challenge, one he intended to overcome. Marcus had spent most of his adult life serving in an elite military unit, specializing in covert operations. His skills weren't just limited to combat. He was also an expert strategist capable of thinking several steps ahead of his enemies. When he finally left the service, he chose isolation, retreating to this unassuming little town where no one asked questions. Over time, he transformed his modest home into a fortress of sorts, equipping it with hidden exits, survival gear, and weapons cleverly disguised as everyday items. All of these preparations were meant for moments like this, when danger came, knocking. Now, as flames engulfed his house, Marcus sprang into action. Moving swiftly, he grabbed a backpack stashed beneath a loose floorboard in the hallway. Inside were tools, medical supplies, and a few gadgets he'd built himself. Then he retrieved a small metal case from a concealed compartment in the wall. Opening it revealed a handgun, extra magazines, and a knife with a serrated blade. These weren't toys, they were instruments of survival, and Marcus handled them with practiced ease. Before leaving, he activated a series of traps he'd installed throughout the house. Motion sensors rigged to release smoke bombs and tripwires designed to entangle intruders ensured that anyone foolish enough to enter would regret it. Satisfied with his preparations, Marcus slipped out through a secret tunnel leading to the Backyard. The passageway was narrow and damp, but it brought him safely away from the inferno raging above. Outside, the gang continued to celebrate their supposed victory. They clapped each other on the back, congratulating themselves for sending such a powerful message. Dax lit another cigarette, exhaling smoke as he watched the house burn. "That'll teach him to mess with us," he said smugly, tossing the match onto the ground. Unbeknownst to them, Marcus was already circling back. Using the dense foliage along the edge of the property, he observed their every move. From his vantage point, he could see the layout of their positions, their weaknesses, their blind spots. He smiled grimly, realizing how easy it would be to dismantle their operation piece by piece. First, Marcus targeted their getaway car. Creeping silently through the shadows, he reached the vehicle parked a few houses down. With a screwdriver and wire cutters, he disabled the brake lines, ensuring the car wouldn't go far once they tried to flee. Next, he set off a homemade smoke bomb near the edge of the lawn. Thick clouds of white smoke billowed into the air, causing immediate chaos among the gang members. They coughed and stumbled, disoriented and panicked. Someone shouted, "What's happening? Is the fire spreading?" Seizing the opportunity, Marcus struck. He emerged from the smoke like a ghost, moving silently and swiftly. Grabbing two of the gang members who had wandered too close to the house, he subdued them with quick, precise movements. A punch to the gut, a twist of the arm, and they were on the ground, gasping for air. Marcus bound their hands with zip ties and gagged them with cloth torn from their own shirts before dragging them into the bushes. By the time the rest of the gang realized something was wrong, two of their own were already neutralized. Back at the scene of the fire, confusion reigned supreme. The remaining gang members scrambled to regroup, shouting orders that went unheard in the chaos. Dax barked commands, trying to maintain control, but his voice cracked with rising panic. "Stay together! Don't let him get away!" But Marcus wasn't running. He was hunting. Using the smoke as cover, he picked off another member of the gang, ambushing him from behind and knocking him unconscious with a single blow to the head. Each attack was calculated, efficient, and devastating. Marcus didn't waste energy or make mistakes. Every move he made was deliberate, honed by years of experience in high-stakes situations. By the time the gang realized they were being systematically dismantled, it was too late. Dax, meanwhile, was losing his grip. He paced back and forth, clutching a baseball bat tightly in his hands. His bravado was crumbling, replaced by fear and uncertainty. "Who is this guy?" he muttered under his breath, scanning the shadows nervously. "Where is he?" Marcus answered that question personally. Emerging from the smoke, he tackled Dax to the ground with brutal force. The impact knocked the wind out of the larger man, leaving him gasping for air. Dax swung wildly, attempting to land a hit, but Marcus dodged effortlessly, countering with a series of precise strikes. Within moments, Dax lay pinned beneath him, struggling futilely against the ropes Marcus used to bind his wrists. "You picked the wrong house," Marcus said coldly, his voice devoid of emotion. There was no anger in his tone, only resolve. For Marcus, this wasn't personal. It was justice. With Dax secured, Marcus turned his attention to the final remnants of the gang. Most had fled in terror, abandoning their comrades in the process. Those who remained were either unconscious or tied up, waiting to be discovered by authorities. Marcus walked back to the burning house, now fully engulfed in flames. Pulling out his phone, he dialed 911 and reported an accidental fire caused by reckless behavior. By the time firefighters arrived, all evidence pointed to the gang's incompetence rather than Marcus's calculated response. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus disappeared into the night, vanishing as quietly as he had appeared. The gang's plan to intimidate him had backfired spectacularly, leaving them broken and exposed. And while the fire still raged behind him, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace. He had survived. He had won. And he had sent a clear message. Don't underestimate someone who knows how to fight back. The night was far from over. While the firefighters worked tirelessly to contain the blaze at Marcus's house, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Neighbors gathered outside, wrapped in blankets or leaning against their cars, watching the chaos unfold. Some whispered nervously about what might have caused the fire, while others speculated about who could live in such a quiet, unassuming home, only to attract so much trouble. Marcus Kane, however, wasn't among them. He had already slipped away, disappearing into the shadows like smoke carried by the wind. For Marcus, the immediate danger was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The gang members he'd neutralized were scattered around his property, tied up and groggy from the ordeal. 2 of them lay unconscious in the bushes, while Dax and another man sat slumped near the curb, their hands bound tightly behind their backs. As police cruisers arrived, blue and red lights flashing, officers quickly assessed the scene. They found the gang members first, looking disheveled and terrified. One officer knelt beside Dax, shining a flashlight in his face. "What happened here?" the officer demanded, his voice sharp. Dax stammered, sweat dripping down his forehead, despite the cool night air. I don't know, we were attacked. There's someone out there." "Attacked? By who?" the officer pressed. Dax hesitated, glancing around as if expecting Marcus to emerge from the darkness again. But Marcus was long gone, leaving no trace of himself behind. All that remained was the wreckage of his house and the shattered remnants of the Iron Fist. Meanwhile, Marcus moved through the woods bordering the neighborhood, keeping low to avoid detection. His backpack bounced lightly against his back as he navigated the uneven terrain, his boots crunching softly on fallen leaves. Despite the adrenaline coursing through him, he felt strangely calm. This wasn't unfamiliar territory for him. It reminded him of missions from his past, where stealth and precision were key to survival. Only this time, the stakes felt more personal. As he walked, memories began to surface. Memories he'd tried hard to bury. He thought about his days in the military, serving alongside men and women who became family. He remembered the camaraderie, the shared sense of purpose, and the sacrifices they made together. But those memories came with scars, both physical and emotional. Marcus had seen too much death, too much destruction. When he finally left the service, he vowed never to let violence define him again. Moving to this quiet town was supposed to be his chance at peace. But now, standing in the middle of the forest with smoke still lingering in the distance, Marcus realized that peace wasn't something you could simply claim. Sometimes it had to be fought for, and sometimes fighting meant doing things he wished he didn't have to do. By dawn, the fire was under control, though Marcus's house was little more than charred rubble. Investigators sifted through the debris, searching for clues about how the fire started. Meanwhile, word spread quickly throughout the town. People talked about the mysterious homeowner who had somehow survived such a devastating attack, and the gang members found tied up nearby. Speculation ran wild. Some believed Marcus had been ambushed by criminals seeking revenge. Others wondered if he'd orchestrated the whole thing himself, using the fire as a cover to take down his enemies. What no one knew was that Marcus was already making plans. By sunrise, he'd reached an old hunting cabin deep in the woods, a place he'd discovered shortly after moving to the area. It was small and rustic, barely big enough to stand upright in, but it served its purpose. Inside, he kept supplies: food, water, ammunition, and tools. For emergencies like this, the cabin was his sanctuary, a place to regroup and think clearly. Sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, Marcus reviewed the events of the night. He replayed every decision, every move he'd made, analyzing what went right and what could have gone better. Though he had dismantled the gang effectively, he knew their arrest wouldn't be the end of the story. Gangs like the Iron Fist operated in networks with connections stretching beyond this small town. If they suspected Marcus was responsible for their downfall, retaliation was inevitable. And Marcus couldn't afford to let his guard down, not even for a moment. Still, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The gang had underestimated him, assuming he was just another ordinary resident of the neighborhood. They hadn't counted on his training, his resourcefulness, or his determination. In a way, their arrogance had sealed their fate. Marcus smiled grimly, knowing they would think twice before targeting anyone else. By mid-morning, news of the incident had reached the local media. Reporters swarmed the neighborhood, interviewing residents and snapping photos of the smoldering ruins of Marcus's house. On TV screens across the town, headlines blared. Mysterious homeowner survives arson. Attack, gang members arrested. The story captured the public's attention, sparking debates about safety, justice, and the rise of hate crimes in suburban areas. Back at the police station, detectives questioned the arrested gang members. Dax refused to cooperate, insisting he knew nothing about the fire or the person responsible for tying them up. His accomplices weren't much help either, offering conflicting accounts of what had happened. Some claimed they'd been attacked by a group of masked assailants, while others swore they saw only one man, a shadowy figure moving faster than seemed humanly possible. Detective Laura Hayes, the lead investigator on the case, listened intently to their stories. A seasoned officer with years of experience, she prided herself on her ability to read people. Something about the gang members' testimony felt off. Their fear was genuine, but there was also an underlying tone of disbelief, as if they couldn't comprehend how they'd been outsmarted. Whoever had taken them down wasn't just lucky, they were skilled. Laura decided to visit the crime scene herself. Walking through the charred remains of Marcus's house, she noticed details that hadn't been mentioned in the initial reports. Burn patterns suggested the fire had started on the porch, likely caused by an accelerant like gasoline. But there were other signs too, small, subtle things that hinted at preparation. A tripwire hidden beneath a pile of ash, a motion sensor rigged to release smoke bombs. Someone had anticipated the attack and planned accordingly. Standing amidst the wreckage, Laura frowned. Who was this man? And why had he gone to such lengths to protect himself? While the authorities pieced together the puzzle, Marcus focused on his next steps. Rebuilding his life wouldn't be easy, especially now that he was essentially homeless. Yet he wasn't worried about material possessions. What mattered most to him was staying alive and ensuring that no one else suffered because of people like the Iron Fist. He spent the afternoon organizing his supplies and mapping out potential safe zones in the surrounding area. He also considered reaching out to a few trusted contacts from his military days, individuals who owed him favors and might provide assistance without asking too many questions. But Marcus hesitated. Bringing others into this mess could put them in danger, and he wasn't willing to risk innocent lives. As evening fell, Marcus ventured back toward the edge of the woods, careful to stay out of sight. From his vantage point, he observed the neighborhood below. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off his property, and a few curious onlookers lingered nearby, whispering amongst themselves. Marcus scanned their faces, searching for any sign of hostility. So far, everyone seemed more curious than threatening. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His instincts proved correct when he spotted a black SUV parked several houses down. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. The vehicle hadn't been there earlier, which meant it had arrived recently, perhaps specifically to monitor the situation. Marcus narrowed his eyes, memorizing the license plate number before retreating deeper into the trees. Whoever was in that car, they weren't part of the local police force. That much was clear. Returning to the cabin, Marcus lit a small fire to ward off the chill creeping into the air. As flames danced in the makeshift hearth, he reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about the gang members, their hatred fueled by ignorance and fear. He thought about the neighbors, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their picket fences. And he thought about himself, the choices he'd made, the skills he'd honed, and the price he'd paid to survive. For years, Marcus had tried to leave his past behind, burying the soldier he used to be beneath layers of normalcy. But the truth was that part of him had never really gone away. It had merely lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Now, faced with adversaries who sought to destroy him, Marcus realized he couldn't run from who he was. Nor did he want to. If anything, the attack had awakened something within him, a fierce determination to protect not just himself, but the community he'd grown to care about. These streets, these homes, these people, they deserved better than to live in fear. And if Marcus had to become the nightmare that haunted those who threatened them, so be it. With renewed resolve, Marcus began preparing for whatever came next. He cleaned his weapons, sharpened his knives, and double-checked his gear. Then he settled down to rest, knowing full well that sleep would come sparingly. By the time the sun rose on the second day after the attack, Marcus Kane was already moving. The forest around him was alive with sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. But his focus remained sharp. He had spent the night reviewing every detail of the previous evening's events, analyzing what he could have done differently, and planning for the future. One thing was certain: the gang's arrest wouldn't stop others like them from coming after him. If anything, it would only escalate the situation. Marcus knew gangs like the Iron Fist didn't operate alone. They were part of a larger network, connected to people who thrived on power, fear, and control. These individuals wouldn't take kindly to seeing their members humiliated and arrested. Retaliation was inevitable. And when it came, Marcus wanted to be ready. He packed up his supplies, leaving the hunting cabin behind for now. The small shelter had served its purpose, but staying in one place for too long was risky. Instead, Marcus decided to create a series of safe zones throughout the area, places where he could retreat if needed. Using his knowledge of the terrain, he identified key locations: abandoned buildings, dense patches of woods, even underground storm drains that most people avoided. Each spot would serve as a fallback position, stocked with essentials like food, water, and ammunition. As he worked, Marcus's mind drifted back to his military days. Back then, preparation was everything. Every mission required meticulous planning, every move had to be calculated. Failure wasn't an option because lives depended on success. Now, years later, those same principles applied, but this time, the stakes felt more personal. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about protecting the fragile piece of the neighborhood he'd come to call home. Back in town, life seemed to return to normal, or at least as normal as it could be after such a dramatic event. Neighbors whispered about Marcus, speculating about who he really was and how he had managed to survive the fire. Some described him as a hero, someone who had stood up to the gang terrorizing the community. Others viewed him with suspicion, wondering if he was somehow involved in the violence himself. Either way, his name was on everyone's lips. Detective Laura Hayes continued her investigation, piecing together clues from the crime scene. She visited Marcus's property multiple times, examining the wreckage with a keen eye. The tripwires, smoke bombs, and hidden exits intrigued her. Whoever had set them up clearly anticipated the attack and prepared accordingly. But why? And how did they know it was coming? Laura also reviewed surveillance footage from nearby homes. Most cameras hadn't captured much useful information, but one grainy video showed a figure slipping out of the woods shortly before the fire broke out. The person moved quickly, almost invisibly, blending seamlessly into the shadows. Though the image was too blurry to identify, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that she was looking at Marcus. Her suspicions deepened when she interviewed some of the neighbors. A few claimed they'd seen Marcus working on his house late at night, carrying tools and materials into the basement. Others mentioned hearing strange noises coming from his property, buzzing drills hammering, the occasional clang of metal against metal. At first glance, these details might seem innocuous, but combined with the evidence from the crime scene, they painted a picture of someone who was far from ordinary. Laura found herself torn. On one hand, Marcus had dismantled a dangerous gang, potentially saving lives. On the other hand, his actions raised questions about his motives and methods. Was he truly a victim caught in the crossfire, or something more complicated? She resolved to dig deeper, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, news of the gang's arrest spread beyond the town, reaching ears Marcus hadn't anticipated. Among those who took notice was Victor Hale, a powerful crime boss operating in the nearby city. Victor ran a sprawling criminal empire built on extortion, drugs, and intimidation. Gangs like the Iron Fist were minor players in his organization, serving as enforcers and foot soldiers. When word reached him that one of his crews had been taken down by a single man, Victor was furious. "Find out who this guy is." Victor barked at his top lieutenant, a wiry man named Carter. And make sure he understands what happens when you mess with my people. Carter nodded, already formulating a plan. Unlike the Iron Fist, Carter was no amateur. He specialized in covert operations, gathering intelligence and striking swiftly without leaving a trace. His reputation was built on precision and ruthlessness, qualities that made him invaluable to Victor. Now, tasked with dealing with Marcus, Carter saw an opportunity to prove himself once again. Using connections within law enforcement and local informants, Carter began assembling a profile of Marcus Kane. He learned about the man's military background, his recent move to the suburbs, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the fire. What intrigued Carter most was Marcus's apparent ability to anticipate and counteract attacks. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just lucky, he was skilled. And skills like that demanded respect. But respect didn't mean leniency. If anything, it made eliminating Marcus all the more important. A man capable of dismantling an entire gang single-handedly posed a significant threat, not just to Victor's operation, but to anyone who crossed his path. Carter knew he couldn't afford to underestimate Marcus. This job would require careful planning and execution. While Carter prepared, Marcus remained one step ahead. After securing his safe zones, he turned his attention to gathering intelligence. He scoured online forums, social media, and local news outlets for any mention of the Iron Fist or related criminal activity. He also kept tabs on the black SUV he'd spotted near his property. Sure enough, it reappeared several times over the next few days, always parked in different locations but never straying far from the neighborhood. Marcus suspected the vehicle belonged to someone sent to monitor him. Whether it was a private investigator hired by the gang's allies or a representative of a larger organization, he couldn't say for sure. But whoever they weren't acting alone. Someone higher up the chain of command was pulling the strings, orchestrating the response to Marcus's actions. To test his theory, Marcus devised a trap. Late one night, he left a decoy trail leading away from the woods. A dropped glove here, a broken branch there. Then he hid in the shadows, waiting to see if anyone followed. Within minutes, headlights pierced the darkness as the SUV crept along the dirt road, tracking his supposed movements. When the driver stepped out to investigate, Marcus struck silently, disarming and restraining him before dragging him into the trees. The man struggled, cursing under his breath, but Marcus silenced him with a firm grip on his shoulder. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice low and steady. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man spat, though his wide eyes betrayed his fear. Marcus tightened his hold, leaning closer. "You've been watching me." "Why?" After a moment of hesitation, the man cracked. "It's Carter. He works for Victor Hale. They want to know who you are and what you're planning." Marcus processed this information carefully. So, it wasn't just the Iron Fist, it was their boss, Victor Hale, who had taken an interest in him. That changed things. Dealing with a street-level gang was one thing, but going up against a well-connected crime boss was another entirely. Marcus released the man, knocking him unconscious with a swift blow to the head. Then he disappeared into the woods, leaving no trace of himself behind. Back in the city, Carter received a report about the failed surveillance attempt. Far from discouraged, he smiled grimly. "So you're good," he muttered to himself. "But let's see how you handle this." Over the next few days, Carter put his plan into motion. He dispatched a team of operatives to infiltrate the neighborhood, posing as utility workers, delivery drivers, and even new residents. Their goal was simple: gather as much information about Marcus as possible while laying the groundwork for an ambush. Meanwhile, Carter coordinated with local gangs loyal to Victor, offering them incentives to keep an eye on the situation. Marcus noticed the sudden influx of unfamiliar faces, but didn't act immediately. Instead, he used their presence to his advantage, feeding them misinformation and creating diversions. He planted fake clues suggesting he was planning to leave town, knowing they would pass the information along to Carter. In reality, Marcus had no intention of running. He was preparing for war. By the end of the week, tensions in the neighborhood reached a boiling point. Residents reported suspicious activity to the police, prompting increased patrols and heightened security measures. Detective Laura Hayes grew increasingly concerned, sensing that something bigger was brewing beneath the surface. She tried reaching out to Marcus directly, leaving messages at his property and asking neighbors if they'd seen him. But Marcus remained elusive, avoiding contact until he was ready to reveal himself. On the 7th night, Marcus made his move. Under the cover of darkness, he infiltrated one of the safe houses Carter's team had set up, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, he found blueprints, maps, and detailed notes outlining plans to capture or kill him. There was even a dossier on his military service, complete with photos. The sun had barely risen when Marcus Kane made his way back to the edge of the woods, his movements deliberate and silent. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. In his hands, he carried a backpack filled with supplies, tools, weapons, and gadgets he'd carefully assembled over the past few days. Every item had a purpose, every tool a role to play in the battle ahead. Marcus wasn't just preparing for a fight. He was crafting a strategy designed to dismantle his enemies piece by piece. As he walked, he replayed Carter's dossier in his mind, the blueprints, maps, and classified documents detailing his military service. How had they obtained that information? Who else might have access to it? These questions gnawed at him, but Marcus pushed them aside. He couldn't afford distractions. Not now. If he wanted to survive and protect the neighborhood, he needed to stay focused on the task at hand. By mid-morning, Marcus had reached one of the safe zones he'd established earlier. An abandoned factory tucked deep in the forest. Its crumbling walls and rusted machinery provided perfect cover, allowing him to observe without being seen. From this vantage point, he could monitor the comings and goings of Carter's operatives, who had begun patrolling the area more aggressively. Their presence was subtle, but noticeable. Delivery trucks lingering too long, utility workers inspecting, non-existent issues, strangers loitering near key intersections. It was clear they were searching for him, though they hadn't yet realized he was watching them. Marcus spent hours studying their patterns, noting how they communicated and coordinated. He identified weak points in their strategy, moments where they let their guard down or became predictable. Each observation added another layer to his plan. By the time night fell, he knew exactly what he needed to do. Under the cover of darkness, Marcus struck. His first target was a pair of operatives stationed near the entrance to the neighborhood. They sat in a parked van sipping coffee and chatting idly. To them, the assignment probably seemed routine, a boring stakeout with little risk involved. But Marcus didn't believe in taking chances. Moving silently through the shadows, he approached the vehicle from behind. A quick tap on the window startled the driver, who rolled it down instinctively. "Hey man, what's—" the operative began, but before he could finish, Marcus yanked him out of the van and subdued him with practiced efficiency. The passenger fared no better, finding himself bound and gagged within seconds. Marcus dragged both men into the nearby bushes, leaving them tied up and hidden from view. Then he planted a small tracking device under the van's chassis, ensuring he could monitor its movements later. From there, Marcus moved to his next target, a group of gang members loyal to Victor Hale. They had set up shop in an old garage on the outskirts of town, using it as a base of operations. Inside, they gambled and drank, oblivious to the danger lurking outside. Marcus circled the building, marking exits and entry points. When he was satisfied with his reconnaissance, he activated a smoke bomb rigged to release thick clouds of white smoke. Within moments, chaos erupted as the gang members scrambled to escape, coughing and shouting in confusion. Seizing the opportunity, Marcus slipped inside undetected. He disabled their communications equipment, cut power to the building, and left behind false evidence suggesting rival gangs were responsible for the attack. By the time the smoke cleared, the gang members were arguing amongst themselves, accusing each other of betrayal. Marcus smiled grimly as he melted back into the shadows, knowing he'd planted seeds of distrust that would take root in the coming days. Back in the city, Carter received reports of the attacks. His frustration mounted as he realized Marcus was not only evading capture, but actively disrupting his operation. He's playing us, Carter muttered to himself, pacing the length of his office. Every move we make, he counters. Every trap we set, he avoids. Victor Hale, however, was less patient. Sitting behind a massive mahogany desk in his penthouse, sweet. He listened intently as Carter briefed him on the situation. You're telling me this guy is still out there? Victor growled, his voice low and menacing. After everything we've done? Carter nodded nervously. Yes, sir, but I assure you we're closing in. He can't keep this up forever. Victor leaned forward, his cold eyes boring into Carter's. Make sure of it. Because if he slips through our fingers again, it'll be your head on the line. Carter swallowed hard, knowing full well the consequences of failure. He returned to his team, redoubling their efforts to locate Marcus. Surveillance intensified, patrols increased, and informants were pressured to provide any scrap of useful information. Yet despite their best efforts, Marcus remained elusive, always one step ahead. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his campaign of disruption. Over the next several nights, he targeted key locations tied to Victor's empire, warehouses storing illegal goods, meeting spots for high-ranking enforcers, even underground gambling dens. Each strike was precise and calculated, designed to weaken Victor's grip on the area without revealing Marcus's true identity. Rumors began circulating among the criminal underworld about a mysterious figure wreaking havoc on their operations. Some called him a ghost, others whispered he was something more dangerous, an avenger. Detective Laura Hayes, meanwhile, found herself caught in the middle of the escalating conflict. Reports of vandalism, theft, and arson poured into the station, all linked to areas associated with Victor Hale's organization. While she couldn't prove Marcus's involvement, her instincts told her he was connected somehow. Determined to uncover the truth, she dug deeper into his background, uncovering details about his military career and the specialized training he'd received. What she learned only deepened the mystery surrounding him. One evening, Laura decided to pay Marcus a visit, or rather what remained of his property. She stood amidst the charred ruins of his house, staring at the blackened foundation. Something about the scene felt off, almost staged. The tripwires, the traps, the decoy trails, it was all too deliberate. Whoever Marcus Kane was, he wasn't just a victim of circumstance. He was a tactician, a strategist, someone who thrived in chaos. As she turned to leave, Laura noticed movement in the trees. Squinting, she spotted a figure watching her from the shadows. Though she couldn't see his face clearly, she recognized the silhouette immediately. "Marcus!" she called out, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Marcus stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. His expression was unreadable, his posture, relaxed yet alert. "Detective Hayes," he said calmly. "I wondered when you'd show up." Laura studied him carefully, noting the scars on his hands and the intensity in his eyes. "What's going on here, Marcus? Why are you doing this?" Marcus hesitated, weighing his options. He could disappear again, vanish into the woods like he always did. But something about Laura's persistence and her genuine concern for the community gave him pause. "It's complicated," he admitted finally. "But I'm not the bad guy." "I never said you were," Laura replied. "But you're playing a dangerous game. People are getting hurt." "They're already hurting," Marcus countered. "Victor Hale and his crew, they prey on fear, on weakness. If someone doesn't stand up to them, they'll keep destroying lives." Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. "There are laws for a reason, Marcus. You can't take justice into your own hands." "And what happens when the law fails?" Marcus asked quietly. "When criminals walk free because they have money or connections? Tell me, detective, how many times have you arrested someone only to see them released days later?" Laura opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She couldn't deny the truth in his words. The system wasn't perfect, and sometimes justice required sacrifices. Still, she couldn't condone vigilante tactics, no matter how noble the intentions. Before she could press further, Marcus glanced over his shoulder, sensing movement in the distance. "We're out of time," he said abruptly. "If you want answers, follow the trail I've left, but be careful. Whoever you trust, make sure they deserve it." With that, he disappeared into the trees, leaving Laura standing alone amidst the wreckage. She stared after him, torn between admiration and frustration. Whatever Marcus Kane was planning, it was far from over, and she feared the consequences would ripple far beyond this quiet suburb. As dawn broke over the horizon, Marcus returned to his makeshift camp in the woods. Exhaustion tugged at his body, but his mind remained sharp. He knew the final confrontation was approaching, and when it came, there would be no turning back. For now, though, he allowed himself a brief moment of rest, leaning against a tree as sunlight filtered through the leaves above. In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, a reminder of the world he sought to change. Marcus closed his eyes, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He had chosen this path knowing the risks and the sacrifices it demanded. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. He wouldn't stop until Victor Hale's empire crumbled, and the neighborhood he called home was safe once more. The final showdown began on a cold, moonless night. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if the world itself knew something monumental was about to unfold. Marcus Kane stood at the edge of the forest, his silhouette barely visible against the dark backdrop of trees. In his hand, he clutched a map marked with red circles, locations tied to Victor Hale's criminal empire. Over the past week, Marcus had dismantled key parts of the operation, striking fear into the hearts of those who once felt untouchable. Now, it was time to confront the man at the top, Victor Hale himself. Victor, however, wasn't waiting idly. Word of Marcus's attacks had reached him, and he responded with characteristic ruthlessness. He ordered Carter to assemble a team of his most trusted enforcers, men with no qualms about violence or collateral damage. Their mission was clear: find Marcus Kane and eliminate him permanently. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had already anticipated their move and turned it to his advantage. As Carter's team swept through the neighborhood, searching for any sign of Marcus, they unknowingly walked into a trap. Marcus had spent hours rigging abandoned buildings and hidden pathways with tripwires, smoke bombs, and decoys designed to confuse and scatter them. When the first explosion rocked the area, chaos erupted. Enforcers shouted orders, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they tried to regroup. But Marcus was everywhere and nowhere, his movements silent and precise. One by one, he picked them off, disabling their weapons, tying them up, and leaving them stranded in the woods. Carter himself led a smaller group deeper into the forest, determined to flush Marcus out. Armed with night vision goggles and tactical gear, they moved cautiously, scanning every shadow for signs of movement. "He's here somewhere," Carter muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "We just need to draw him out." Unbeknownst to them, Marcus was already watching from above. Perched on a low-hanging branch, he observed their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When Carter paused to consult a handheld device, a tracker linked to the decoy signal Marcus had planted earlier, Marcus dropped down behind him, landing silently. Before anyone could react, Marcus disarmed two of the enforcers and knocked Carter to the ground with a swift kick to the chest. "You should have stayed out of this," Marcus said coldly, pressing a knife to Carter's throat. "Tell me where Victor is." Carter sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You think you can take him down? You're nothing but a ghost haunting the shadows." Marcus tightened his grip, leaning closer. "Then maybe it's time." I stepped into the light. After extracting the information he needed, Marcus left Carter bound and gagged, retreating deeper into the woods. By dawn, only fragments of the enforcer team remained, scattered and demoralized. News of their failure reached Victor Hale, who sat in his penthouse suite overlooking the city. His expression was unreadable, though his clenched fists betrayed his fury. "Enough," Victor growled, slamming his fist onto the desk. "I'll deal with him myself." By midday, word spread that Victor Hale had arrived in town. Rumors claimed he was personally overseeing operations, determined to crush whoever dared challenge his authority. Marcus monitored these developments closely, using informants and surveillance footage to track Victor's movements. He learned that Victor had set up a temporary base in an old industrial complex on the outskirts of the neighborhood, a fortress surrounded by armed guards and reinforced gates. Marcus knew breaking in wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that Victor's arrogance would be his downfall. If Marcus played his cards right, he could turn the crime boss's overconfidence against him. That evening, under the cover of darkness, Marcus approached the industrial complex. Dressed in black and armed with tools crafted for stealth and precision, he moved like a shadow, slipping past perimeter patrols and disabling security cameras. Inside, he found a maze of corridors and rooms filled with crates of illegal goods and stacks of cash. At the center of it all was Victor Hale, seated in a makeshift office lined with monitors displaying live feeds of the surrounding area. Victor leaned back in his chair, a smug grin on his face. "So, you finally showed up," he said, addressing the empty room as though he already knew Marcus was there. "I have to admit you've impressed me. Not many people can dismantle my empire piece by piece, but now it ends." From the shadows, Marcus stepped forward, his weapon trained on Victor. "It doesn't have to end like this," Marcus said evenly. "Walk away, and I won't pursue you." Victor laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You really think you can stop me? Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Marcus replied. "A bully hiding behind money and muscle. That's why you're afraid of me. I don't play by your rules." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, Victor lunged for a concealed handgun beneath his desk. Marcus reacted instantly, firing a single shot that struck Victor's shoulder, pinning him to the chair. Victor cried out in pain, clutching his wound as blood seeped through his fingers. "It's over," Marcus said firmly. "Your reign of terror ends tonight." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Laura Hayes, tipped off by Marcus earlier, had gathered enough evidence to raid the complex. When officers stormed the building, they found Victor injured and surrounded by incriminating documents detailing his crimes. As paramedics tended to Victor's wounds, Laura approached Marcus, her expression conflicted. "You did it," she said quietly. "But at what cost?" Marcus shrugged, holstering his weapon. "Sometimes justice requires sacrifices. I'm willing to bear the weight of mine." With that, Marcus disappeared into the night, leaving behind the life he'd fought so hard to protect. Days later, residents whispered about the mysterious man who had saved their neighborhood, unsure whether to call him a hero or something else entirely. For Marcus, labels didn't matter. What mattered was that the community was safe, and that he had kept his promise to stand up for those who couldn't fight back. In the weeks that followed, Marcus rebuilt his life, quietly resuming his role as a neighbor and protector. Though scars remained, both physical and emotional, he carried them with pride, reminders of battles won and lessons learned. And though he hoped for peace, he knew better than anyone that sometimes the best way to achieve it was to strike fear into those who sought to destroy it. As the sun set over the suburb, casting long shadows across the streets, Marcus stood on the porch of his newly rebuilt home. Behind him lay the wreckage of his past. Ahead stretched a future full of possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Marcus Kane was ready. Because, in the end, some fights are worth fighting, not just for yourself but for everyone who deserves a chance at peace.